Welcome back, my brave and beautiful humans, to another episode of Soul Hygiene. I have my wonderful friend, the forgiveness guy, Mr. Rob, with us again. And he's kind of become our monthly regular, which I love because, I mean, who doesn't need forgiveness? And really, we should all be giving it. So, I really enjoy our conversations that we have. So, I thought, let me turn my phone down. Don't want that beeping. Um, I thought with Valentine's Day coming up, we could talk about some things that I think couples kind of go through. Um, and when they go through it, maybe Mr. Rob can give us a little bit of clarity, some tips and tricks of how to get through um, some, I would call them, could turn into danger zones in relationships, but, trying to avoid those. Um, and how we can do that. Sometimes it is with forgiveness, sometimes it's with just giving each other a little bit of space and or setting some boundaries. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Rob.
It is my pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course, I always enjoy having you on this show. You bring a lot of, I think forgiveness is a broad word, right?
Mhm.
People don't always understand, I think, how to give it and
Mhm.
sometimes how to receive it. So I think having you on here kind of helps us with some clarity and, give us some. I like that you bring boundaries into it because I think even with forgiveness, there has to be some boundaries.
Absolutely.
So I know, like with my past and everything that I went through, there's always those moments that I can be like, oh, yes, I remember, when this happened to me. So I always enjoy our conversations. So we're going to start off. I did like kind of put together a few questions for Mr. Rob because I think that, like I said, with Valentine's Day next week, these are kind of good questions for, I think, couples or even, married couples, boyfriend, girlfriend, or even thought provoking questions if you're looking for a relationship. Like, what would you want to see out of a relationship? Are these things that you could handle or deal with? You know? So the first one I had was I forgot to turn down my phone, so apologize for the beeping, everyone, if you heard that. Um, how important is forgiveness in maintaining a healthy, a balanced, a successful, all of those positive things in a relationship? How important is forgiveness?
You probably won't be surprised by this answer, but I'm going to say essential. If you can't forgive, you can't really have a relationship, at least any kind of healthy relationship. Because if you're not forgiving people for when they make mistakes, and sometimes they're intentional, sometimes unintentional, and you just hold on to that, you're going to build up resentment. You're going to have anger issues. It's not going to be good. And if you're like me when I was a kid, that anger and resentment would it would eventually explode. And that never made for any good conversation or constructive conversation. So it really is essential. And um, that's going to help in communication. It's going to help in your health.
Mm.
So yeah, it's essential. It really is.
I think it's also very, very important. I think it's one of the building blocks that I really feel like if you're in a marriage or a relationship or wanting to be in a relationship, it's almost like you need to sit down with your partner and ask them questions. How do you feel about this? Or how do you feel about this? Things that you think are important.
Hmm.
And we'll talk a little bit about boundaries, but um, because I feel like if that partner already is saying, oh, totally against this, or that's dumb, that's stupid, which I have been told in the past.
Mhm.
My experience was, I did not have those conversations. Obviously, I've had to learn through my healing process what my next relationship would look like. I don't want to carry baggage into my next relationship. I don't want to,
Yeah.
um, I
Yep.
do all these things. So there are conversations that I want to have, right? But when I was going through 25 years of trauma, obviously these are not conversations that were had. And so I was very blessed to have a mom who taught me forgiveness.
Hmm.
You know, first taught me the forgiveness of God and how he forgives us, right?
Yeah.
But also how we can forgive others and how really um, we need to receive forgiveness. So that's another area that might be a whole different podcast because I think people people struggle receiving forgiveness because they struggle admitting that they need it.
Hmm.
So that's probably going to be another podcast. But yeah, I think. What are your thoughts on that?
I love how you brought up receiving forgiveness is just as important as giving forgiveness because forgiveness requires taking responsibility. And I would say take extreme responsibility because in any interaction, any argument, trauma, big, small, it's a two-way street. There are two people involved. And, you know, taking responsibility for, you know, your part in the, blow up or whatever, uh, is very important. So forgiveness really is crucial on both ends. And yeah, a lot of people struggle receiving forgiveness, especially when they don't think they did anything wrong.
Yeah,
But if they are willing to, it really does open up, the possibility for deeper emotional intimacy because you get to start sharing with one another, hey,
yeah,
you you really made
yeah,
me feel bad. You made me
yeah.
feel worthless, when you said things like that. And uh, something else for your listeners to take into consideration is that our words matter.
Mm-hmm.
How we say things matters even more because that communicates a lot more. Nonverbal communication. I love it. You know, if y'all aren't familiar with it, please start learning about it because how you show up, your facial expressions, your rate of speech,
Right,
intonation, and all that kind of stuff, you know, conveys meaning,
right.
sometimes even more than the words themselves. So, uh, having forgiveness as a part of the relationship, an essential part of it that you guys agree upon, what those parameters look like at the start, I think is fantastic. Most people don't because they just have the butterflies and it's like, oh, I love this person. They can never do any wrong. And then all of a sudden, cracks start
Yeah.
showing. People go, oh, whoa, hold on. So a lot of people don't set those parameters, how to deal with conflict initially. So having that conversation, I think, is a great thing at the start if you can. Yeah.
Well, and
If
it's one reason why I'm hoping this show has an effect on people, because I don't think people think about that. They don't think about the conversations. I know for me, like having a conversation like that opens up also your trust. When you're someone like me who's been through everything I've been through, um, you lose that trust for people.
Mhm.
And when I started my healing journey and I did that mindset switch and I was like, nope, no more a victim, I had to intentionally work on trusting people.
Mhm.
But for me, it was easy to trust people who took accountability, who said sorry when they did something wrong,
Mhm.
because forgiveness, in like I've said on previous podcasts, for me, forgiveness is not a tremendously hard thing.
Mhm.
Okay. Does it take some thinking and some prayer? Yes. But I am not a grudge holder. I've never been, just because I know that, and this is a little off topic a little bit, but when you start to trust someone, you see the good that is in them and how much better they can be. Because
Mhm.
someone who can take accountability and say sorry, you know, they have a good heart.
Yeah.
Really, they do. And so you also have to look at that. Like when you're in a relationship, have the hard conversations, see how that person reacts, you know? And if they don't blow up at you and they're not calling you names, and they're taking responsibility for hurting your feelings or doing something that was, crossed one of your boundaries, then really, look at forgiving them for what they did.
Yeah.
Don't
Uh,
use it against it. Don't hold it against them. Move on from it, you know.
yeah. Uh, for the Christians, other believers like ourselves, it's a requirement. It's not
Mhm.
it's not a suggestion, it's a requirement that we are to forgive when someone comes and apologizes and repents. And that, is not, hey, I'm sorry, let's move on, and that kind of stuff. But, full apologies is like taking ownership, like you
Mhm.
talked about, taking ownership of, hey, I wronged you. I screwed up. I'm sorry. I really am. I'm going to do better to not do this, and having a plan of these are the steps I'm going to take. So that's a real apology. That's real repentance, turning away, and having a plan of action to not repeat it. Do
Right.
people you know fall back into old patterns? Yes, they
Yeah.
do.
They're human.
It's a trauma response that
Yep.
deep-seated stuff that probably needs work on. But when someone apologizes, we're supposed to forgive. Now, for the
Yeah.
non-Christians, it's still good to forgive when someone apologizes to you, because you're going to free yourself of the mental and emotional hamster wheel that you'll be stuck on until
Right.
you.
Right. Well, and some people are like, oh, you're supposed to forgive and forget. No, no. I mean, and honestly, the Bible doesn't say that. The Bible says to forgive. Now, we are human, we don't forget. I think as a woman, which I am, um, I remember things from so many years ago, um, and even though my memory with my MS has kind of taken my short-term memory a little bit here and there, I still remember things, that were done. Now, if I hadn't forgiven those things, I would be a very miserable person. And I think that's one thing that people don't understand is that when you live in this victimized mindset of unforgiveness, it's one of the worst things you can do to yourself. I know for me, it created like when I had that epiphany when God said, turn away from this. You're not a victim. Let's get going. Like, you're better than this. It was almost like this burden was lifted and my body wasn't hurting as bad because
Yeah.
people don't understand that they hold the grudges within themselves. And grudges contain anger, contain sadness, contain depression. All these negative things that
Hmm.
go along with it are held within our bodies. And
Yeah.
unless we're releasing that, unless we're forgiving, unless we're meditating and, praying, if that's what you do, our bodies sometimes you're causing yourself to be sick.
It, you're absolutely correct. And there's plenty of research that
Mm-hmm.
backs that up. If I don't know if you are familiar, if we've talked about the ACE test or the Adverse Childhood Experience test, they wanted to know if there's a direct correlation between adverse childhood experiences and disease later on in life. Turns out, yes, unresolved adverse childhood experiences do correlate directly to all kinds of things from,
Mhm.
alcohol addiction to chronic pain to mental issues, all the way up to cancer.
Yeah.
And the first test was done by Kaiser and the CDC with 17,500 individuals. And so it's, spiritual side aside, there's hard facts, and that test has been duplicated thousands of times since.
And I think that's why meditating and prayer is so important. Even if you just meditate, I meditate and I pray,
Mhm.
because I know when I'm overwhelmed. I know when I'm stressed out, and that stuff stays in you. I know when I'm getting sad, when I'm crying, or, I go in sometimes, not to use my MS as an excuse, but it kind of is in my case, sometimes it just, it makes my emotions just completely wacky, right? But even in that sense, when I meditate, I'm able to bring them down to a level where it's not harming my body.
Mhm.
And I think that's very important. I love that you brought that up, because if we could just teach our kids, if we could just teach them before they go through all the things that come with adulthood, if we could just teach them to meditate, to be peaceful, to learn how to forgive, to not hold these things within themselves, we would have such a strong generation of just really strong minded adults,
Mhm.
emotionally mature adults, self reflecting adults, account adults who took accountability.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I just really feel like, our children go through so much in this day and age, that teaching them just these basic skills, which they are basic skills. This is not, I want to say, rocket science.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, we're not taking you to Mars like Elon, but these are things that you can sit down with your child every single day and teach them,
Yeah.
you know, about life and about these things that stay within our bodies that could potentially save them from a future of harm and pain.
Yeah. It really is important to teach the next generation and educate people our age, older too, because
Yeah.
the older generation, emotions those don't exist. We just push through it, kind of at least
Yeah.
on the male side of things. Uh, and forgiveness is seen as weakness, but it actually takes a lot of strength to forgive someone,
Yeah.
to you know process your emotions, express that, let the other person understand, hey, you said this. I hear you. I acknowledge that I received it this way.
Right.
And I forgive you for unintentionally causing me distress. You
Yeah.
know, when you didn't intend that, was that, having that kind of question back back and forth, that dialogue. But and since this is going to hopefully be out around the uh, Valentine's Day time,
Yeah.
uh, it's important to understand, when you're in a relationship or looking to get into a relationship, people come with baggage. Even if they grew up in the perfect household, there's
Hmm.
still going to be baggage
Yeah.
that is there. And, you know, be flexible and forgiving when they don't show up how you expect them to show up because they're not you. And that's a
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. No, and that brings me to another point that I think goes along with forgiveness is, and I think I mentioned it just a few minutes ago, emotional maturity. You
Mhm.
know, I think they go hand in hand, and here's why I say that is because I know we were going to talk a little bit about, the silent treatment in relationships and what we can do, and if damaged relationships can be repaired.
Mhm.
To me, I hate the silent treatment.
Yeah.
Just tell me what's going on. Tell me what's on your mind. You know, I am,
Wait,
I
you're
don't
not a
like
mind
to
reader?
use, yeah, I don't like to use the word triggered because it's not really a triggering point. Doesn't make me depressed, but it certainly is a pet peeve. Definitely is one of those things. Yeah.
And
Just
that's okay.
Yeah, just tell me. And you know what? But I've had to look at it from a different perspective, right? There are
Mhm.
some people that can't tell you how they feel right away. They need time to process it, they need time to just be with themselves. And even though it is a pet peeve of mine, I have to have grace towards that person and
Mhm.
understand and have some compassion that not everybody is like me who just needs, I need to talk it out. I need you to talk it out with me right now, you
Oh,
know,
yeah.
because I'm the type of person like if there's an issue and I did something wrong, I want to know. I want to know right now so that I can say sorry, so that I can fix it, because I'm a fixer. That's my personality.
Mhm.
But, and even if it's just me, I need to fix me. Um, but if it's not a malicious silent treatment,
Yeah.
then you have to have some grace to give that person some time. Now, there should be a timetable. It shouldn't take
I
2
was
weeks.
I was just
Okay.
about to go into
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. It shouldn't take 2 weeks. I don't feel like. Give them 24 hours, especially if it's something that's really detrimental to the relationship, maybe a couple days. I don't know. Your thoughts on that?
Maybe, I mean, I would say going back to setting some good parameters for communication, because communication is another key to good, healthy
Yeah.
relationships. And ha I've had to learn, my wife and I have had to learn, hey, we need to set up some boundaries, some guidelines on how we handle conflict. Because, lo and behold, there's going to be conflict. Two people in a room, there's going to be conflict between each other, uh, whether it's intentional or not.
Right.
So initially, we didn't really have that. I'm kind of like you. I like to handle things right here, right now. Let's do this, move on, because that's what I was taught. Again, not necessarily a healthy way of dealing with things. Um, my wife, when we first got married, she was more of a writer and less of a talker. So it was, like pulling teeth trying to get any kind of information from her of what was going on between her ears. Um, so setting up a good way to communicate, especially when you get into a really heated argument, emotions are running really high, and you might say something you'll regret.
Yeah.
Say, setting up, saying, "Okay, hey, we're we're at that level. Let's take 30 minutes. Okay, let's cool down. Let's regulate our emotions, our nervous system, do some box breathing, to help with that. And then let's come back and have a conversation. For really, really heavy stuff, yeah, you might need 24 hours, 48 hours, that kind of stuff. It depends.
Yeah.
It depends on what you guys agree to and what you're capable of, because not everyone is at the same emotional maturity level.
Right.
So understanding that between each other is very important. And that also, you know, helps with that silent treatment thing. It's a verbal agreement. Hey, look, I need some time. I need, let's take a break, time out, whatever, and we're going to come back to this.
Right.
That communication keeps you from the receiving person on the silent treatment from getting anxious, feeling like they're having to walk on eggshells, like they can't bring the topic up again, wait for the other person to make the move. That eliminates that dynamic from the relationship. And that dynamic is toxic. So,
Yes.
and, you know, people, tend to use the silent treatment to manipulate. And uh, so if that is a common, occurrence in a relationship, have a conversation about setting up parameters
Right.
to come back together to talk about things, separate when emotions are heavy. If they're not willing to, probably need to see some professional help.
Yeah. And that's the one thing, like if you have a partner, and backtrack, I was like your wife for a very long time. This is how I know that healing works. Okay. I used to be a very anxious person. When I first was starting my healing journey, I was the same way because that's how I'd been all my life. I would just write letters. This is how I feel. I would write a letter
Hmm.
because I would get too anxious if someone was standing there just confronting me and being belligerent. And I would be like, I can't breathe. I can't think, and when you're having anxiety, you can't think,
Hmm.
right? And I was in situations obviously that were very, very toxic, and I felt like I couldn't walk away from it.
Right.
Um, but when I started truly healing, and probably in the last, I would say 3 years, now
Hmm.
I've become this person that I want to know how you're feeling. I want to know if I can do something to help. I want to know if I did something. I want to be able to fix it. So it's almost like the complete opposite of how I used to be, but this is the person I was supposed to be all along. And that's why I feel like at 50 years old, I'm just coming into the person God created, you
Hmm.
know, because I was so stifled and abused for all those years that I couldn't be who I was truly meant to be. So that's a side note. Um, but I really do believe like if couples had this conversation, it would save a lot of divorces, but it would also save a lot of people marrying the wrong person
Yeah.
because you don't know the person. And this is why I say emotional maturity is so important. If someone is not emotionally mature, then all you're doing is talking. They're not comprehending. And the point of having a conversation is to comprehend what the person is saying and to truly understand, right? I mean, that's the whole point of speaking to someone,
Right.
right? You want them to understand, you want them to comprehend what you're saying. And I'm just, I know for me, when I was in that situation, I was never heard, and that is devastating in a relationship, and it doesn't end well. Your thoughts on that?
I I agree. It setting up good ways of communicating to one another. Active listening is, one of my favorite things to
Mhm.
do. Not a lot of people are good at it. It takes practice, it takes
Yeah,
intentionality, but listening to understand, to comprehend, instead of listening to, you know,
just
say
talk.
what you want to, your next point. Okay, you're
Yeah,
done with whatever you said. Now listen to what I'm saying. But to comprehend and understand, and a good way of doing this is, active listening to understand and then repeating back to them saying, what I heard you say was, and
mhm,
either repeat it verbatim, but I sometimes that doesn't process in your brain. At least, there have been times where it's like I heard the words, I didn't process them because I wasn't truly active listening to the person. Um, so restating it in your own words uh, is going to help you process that. One, that's going to let them know, hey, they actually heard me.
right. Yeah,
And
validating yeah, what they're saying.
it's validating what they're saying, their emotions, their being. And two, you can then go, okay, I heard you. And something that I've recently learned, you know, and I've known this before, you can communicate something and it be received not how you wanted it to be received.
Yeah.
So the person receiving the communication is like, what I heard you say was this. How I received it was this. And these are the emotions that I'm going through,
Right.
and then you get to have more of a
That other
dialogue.
person gets to be like, no, that's not what I meant. This is, yeah. I completely agree with you, and I think it's so important. I think we're going to have to do a part two on this. Maybe still
Right.
have it post this month, maybe, or you know,
I'd be glad to
yeah,
come back.
yeah. But no, because I think there's so much work that couples can do together to
Mm.
really make a successful relationship. So as we close the show, is there any encouragement that you can give couples, after everything that we've talked about? Is there any encouragement that you can give couples who will be?
Yeah. I encourage you guys to actively listen to one another, forgive, like have these conversations about what forgiveness is, to you, because not everyone has the same definition, but be proactive in forgiving. Don't hold on to stuff.
Yeah.
Understand that at the core, you love this person and they love you. Having that understanding, especially when you get into arguments,
Mm-hmm.
uh, is going to make it easier for you to forgive because you understand, yeah, they totally pissed me off when they did this, but I know that they love me and
Right.
we're going to have conflict. So be active in forgiveness. And next time, remind me, I'll share what my wife and I do in the act of listening that pulls forgiveness into it too, that has been very beneficial in our conflicts and our conversations. So,
So you were just agreeing to a part two then. Okay.
yes. Yep.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here with us, Mr. Robin. I hope everyone enjoys. If you're celebrating Valentine's Day next week, I hope you enjoy it. And really take to heart what Mr. Rob has said. I think it is very beneficial for relationships or even future relationships. If you can learn these skills now before you get in a relationship, it will make such an immense difference in the way that you communicate with your partner. So thank you. And we will have a part two to this, hopefully in the next couple of weeks before the end of February. Thank you so much for joining us for
Pleasure.
another episode of Soul Hygiene. We'll see you later. Bye for now.